NA Basic Text, Second Chance. A host of bad choices ultimately led to relapse for this addict with 13 years clean. It was a hard road back to recovery, but NA loved her until she could love herself. Second Chance. As I sat on the edge of my couch, with my head in my hands, I felt completely bewildered. I was crying, but I didn't feel any tears. I was screaming, but there wasn't any sound. And I was watching my husband of 12 years pace the house like a caged animal. I was too nervous to talk to him, and afraid not to. Our NA friends from around the country were ringing the phone off the hook. They all had suggestions and ideas. There was a lot of whispering going on. Plans were being made. My whole life was in complete and utter insanity. This all seemed so surreal. A few weeks earlier at my NA home group, I had picked up my 13-year medallion, and less than a month later, there I was, sitting on my couch, a newcomer. Today, I know that my relapse started long before that. Over the years, I've heard many addicts say, one bad thought and one bad action could lead to relapse. For me, at the time, it wasn't about the thought because I didn't think. I hadn't thought at all. For me, it was entirely about my bad actions. I was in my office, sitting at my business partner's desk, and inside a slightly open drawer, I saw a pile of crystal meth. I reached in, took it out, and played with it a little bit, and snorted it. Period. I certainly wish I had thought something, anything, but I didn't. I had stopped thinking well before I was faced with the opportunity to do that one bad action. Today, I know so many factors played into my relapse. I hardly went to meetings, almost none at all. I hadn't been keeping in contact with fellow addicts, and I had held on to a self-centered resentment with my sponsor that separated us for a whole year. The list could go on and on. Dishonesty, complacency, greed, arrogance, judgment. For a long time, I had felt immune to relapse and had an attitude of better than. When I got clean the first time, I considered myself a high bottom addict. Sure, I used a lot of different drugs, just about anything I could get my hands on, but cocaine and pot were my drugs of choice. I was a middle-class girl who turned up her nose at those dirty drugs, like meth or crank. The progression of my disease, for all those years clean, is hard to believe. When I relapsed, I used like there wasn't any tomorrow. Like there wasn't any price to be paid. I recklessly tore through the lives of those who loved me. The greater the pain, the more I used, without any thought of living or dying. Overnight, my addiction once again held me prisoner. I started gouging at the skin on my face and pulling chunks of flesh from my body from that very first day. I continued to believe that I was infested with bugs for a very long time. I was hooked, and even though I kept using, the drugs weren't getting me high any longer. I just kept getting more and more detached, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I knew that I had unleashed a huge monster. I remember feeling so trapped by the thoughts in my head full of Narcotics Anonymous and by my body full of drugs. When I heard my sponsor's voice on the telephone, the resentment that had separated us for so long disappeared. I was really comforted by the sound of her voice. Her words took me to a safe and vulnerable place that I hadn't been to in quite some time. but they also confirmed for me that I had gotten myself into a real nightmare. A nightmare that neither she nor anyone else could fix for me. Surrender was a long way away. The very last place I wanted to go was the treatment, because of all my judgment about treatment in the past. But I knew once my sponsor and other NA friends started suggesting it, that was exactly where I was headed. In a moment of clarity, I admitted that I didn't want to become a statistic of jails, institutions, or death. I knew that I was in serious trouble. Instead of feeling grateful that I was being given the chance to get clean again, I felt angry, hurt, scared, and crazy with paranoia. I had lived the miracle of the program for 13 years, and now I felt like an alien. I felt like I didn't fit anywhere, not in NA, and certainly not on the streets. I didn't stay clean. I was mentally unstable and a danger to myself, as well as to others. I kept fighting the process like a soldier at war. I left the inpatient treatment facility against the advice of my counselor. I was so raw and completely full of rage. Unfortunately for me, it took 3 trips to treatment to finally get it. Getting off drugs was not easy, but it was the easier part. My pain, shame, guilt, and complete confusion were all too much to take. Instead of calling my sponsor or support system, I ran from everyone and everything. I went from town to town. I landed back in my hometown and checked into yet another treatment center. Finally realized I was the problem. I went to their outpatient program for only 3 days, but I did continue to see their addiction specialist for over a year. He drug tested me on a regular basis and was very NA oriented. I needed that kind of accountability. I was so unpredictable. I didn't trust anything, most of all myself. A lot of my relapse is a blur to me. I haven't any memory of the very last time I used before entering treatment. But I will never, ever forget walking back through the doors of NA. I was terrified. I sat through that first meeting, wanting to get loaded and run. I was sweating, I was shaking, and my stomach felt like I was going to be sick. I didn't think that I had what it took to do this whole recovery thing again. I truly believed that I was just a has-been. My sponsor suggested that I share at the next meeting that I attended. The only thing that I said was my name, and that I had relapsed with 13 years clean. I have never experienced anything like that night. I expected judgment and criticism, but what I actually received was nothing but love. I was embraced by the addicts in that room. I arrived at the meeting feeling hopeless and left feeling like I, too, had a fighting chance. I had to do everything differently. For a long time, I felt as if I would never be normal again, and regardless of stubbing my toes along the way, I just kept trying. As much as I would love to say that I was grateful at that moment for being clean, and that nothing else mattered, I can't. I was stuck in the place of how I used to be, or how I used to look, for a long time. The majority of my clean life before relapsing was a beautiful thing. I had some good friends, a great family, and a dedicated marriage. Once I picked up, every aspect of my life changed. My friends and family were scared of death, that I would end up dead, and my marriage had hit the skids, to say the least. I was so overwhelmed by feelings, I thought I would just die. Numbing those feelings felt like an option for a long, long time, It wasn't until I began writing on my steps again, getting honest with my sponsor, and sharing in meetings that my thinking began to change. The more meetings I attended, the better I felt. I had to realize that what I had put myself through was a trauma to my body and mind. I had to quit fighting the grieving process that was necessary for me to begin to heal, trust, and change. It was necessary for me to grieve the woman I once was, the life I once had, and the marriage that my husband and I had worked so hard to build in order to accept the woman I was becoming and make a new life for myself. I learned to be gentle with myself as I would with any newcomer. The knowledge that I had accumulated in my first 13 years had to be put aside so that I could become teachable. I had to learn the gift of humility and vulnerability. I learned to be honest with myself as well as with others. No matter the shame I felt, I learned how to ask for help and accept it when it was offered. The days of thinking that meetings were a social affair or a fashion show were over. For me, meetings were essential to staying clean. This was the real deal. I was here this time to save my life. Today, looking back, it feels as if that period of my life was forever ago. I can remember being on my knees, praying to my higher power for the obsession to use to be lifted, and begging for a quiet heart and peace of mind. The desperation I felt during that time just makes me stutter. Other than being clean, I just wanted to feel comfortable in my own skin and not be overtaken with nightmarish thoughts and using dreams. Today, I am worlds away from that woman who entered treatment over 7 years ago. I'm comfortable in my own skin, and best of all, I do have a quiet heart and peace of mind. I am extremely grateful to my higher power, my sponsor, and all the people who helped guide me back to the quality of life that I am once again living. I have a deep compassion for the still suffering addict, be it the addict who is sitting in the rooms in Narcotics Anonymous, the addict who has yet to find the rooms, or especially the addict who left and has yet to find the way back again. I can only pray that I will never let the memory of the pain it took for me to return to the program, and always remember I was loved back, not judged back. I want to always remember so that I can extend that same respect to another addict. I have so much today, but honestly, none of it was possible without a lot of hard footwork. I had to begin by forgiving myself for disrespecting the very program that saved my life the first time 21 years ago, for disrespecting my marriage, which began in recovery, and last but not least, for disrespecting myself for returning to a life of drugs and disease. I don't live in shame today about what happened, but I have learned from my mistakes. I share honestly and openly with other addicts. I would give anything and everything under the sun to have taken a different route, but because I can't, I need to accept the responsibility for my own actions and grow from it. I believe today that if I had never relapsed, I would have 21 years abstinent, and that is all. But thankfully, I have 7.5 years clean, with tons of heart and soul, dedication, and a love I can hardly put into words. With the help of others, the 12 steps, and the principles of this program, my marriage was saved. I've gained trust within my family and friends again. I am no longer an outsider looking in. I am part of. It has been a long road back, but I believe I am one of the lucky ones.